Rule number 1 of surviving a New England winter: never leave the apartment. Rule number 2: if you absolutely have to leave, make someone else do it for you. Currently, I was executing rule number 1 flawlessly. The off-campus apartment we rented was a drafty icebox, the aging heating system coughing up lukewarm air like an asthmatic chain smoker. Outside, a blizzard was aggressively burying Boston under 2 feet of snow, rattling the thin glass of the windows. Inside, I was buried under 3 layers of fleece blankets on our tragically worn-out velvet sofa, successfully impersonating a burrito. Crunch! I chewed another sour cream and onion potato chip, glaring at the chaotic battlefield of crumpled sketch paper littering the rug. To hell with Professor Higgins, I muttered to the empty room, letting a chip crumb fall onto my chin. To hell with the entire fine arts department, and to hell with the human anatomy. My final figure drawing portfolio was due at 8:00 a.m. tomorrow. I was exactly 1 piece short a detailed, dynamic study of the male torso. A reasonable student would have gone to the campus studio yesterday. But I wasn't reasonable. I was a genius who happened to suffer from chronic laziness. And now I was paying the price. I needed a live model. A muscular one. In this weather, I wouldn't even be able to bribe a stray dog to walk through let alone a guy with decent obliques. I was actively contemplating whether I could forge a hyper-realistic drawing entirely from memory when the front door handle clicked. A gust of freezing air swept into the living room, carrying with it a towering, broad-shouldered silhouette. Enter Hunter, my roommate, the university's star swim team captain, and a walking, talking billboard for aggressive heterosexuality. He kicked the door shut with a snow-covered boot, stomping his feet on the welcome mat. His dark hair was damp, sticking to his forehead despite the sub-zero temperature outside. He looked exhausted, radiating the kind of disciplined, athletic misery I actively avoided at all costs. But more importantly, my eyes instantly locked onto the massive, grease-stained paper bucket dangling from his gloved hand. The smell hit me before he even took off his heavy winter coat, spicy deep-fried, heavily seasoned Salvation, Popeyes. My stomach let out a pathetic, audible growl that echoed in the quiet apartment. Hunter paused, his sharp blue eyes scanning the disaster zone of my living room before finally landing on the blanket mound on the sofa. He let out a long, heavy sigh that sounded like a weary parent dealing with a feral, ungrateful toddler. Are you actively trying to fuse with the upholstery? Asher Hunter asked, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated pleasantly against the chill of the room. I'm conserving energy, I shot back, not moving an inch, and mourning my academic career. Give me a piece of that chicken before I wither away. Hunter walked into the kitchen, setting the steaming bucket on the island counter. You haven't moved since I left for practice at 5 in the morning, have you? Moving is for peasants and athletes, I said, finally wiggling one arm out of my blanket cocoon to gesture dramatically. Artists suffer in stillness. Speaking of suffering, Higgins is trying to kill me. I need a male model by tonight, or I fail the semester. Hunter leaned against the counter, crossing his massive arms over his chest, even layered under an expensive, heavy-duty university hoodie. The sheer bulk of his chest and shoulders was ridiculous. It was unfair, really. I survived on fast food spite and irregular sleep schedules, while he treated his body like a sacred temple dedicated to protein shakes and chlorine. So, call someone, Hunter said reasonably. It's a blizzard, you absolute meathead. No one is coming over. I'm doomed. I let my head fall back against the armrest, groaning toward the ceiling. I guess I'll just drop out. Become a professional couch tester. Or starve to death, actually. I am starving, Hunter seriously. Give me a drumstick. I can smell the Cajun fries from here. Have some mercy. Hunter didn't move toward the chicken. Instead, he stared at me for a long, calculating moment. His jaw ticked. For a guy who claimed to be 100% straight, he had this incredibly frustrating habit of looking at me with an intensity that made the fine hairs on the back of my neck stand up. A male model, he repeated, his tone shifting, muscular. Preferably, I snorted. But at this point, I'd settle for anyone with a pulse and a ribcage. Hunter uncrossed his arms. His large hands moved to the hem of his dark gray hoodie. What are you doing? I asked, my voice suddenly faltering. He didn't answer. With one smooth, fluid motion, Hunter pulled the heavy fabric over his head, tossing it carelessly onto a nearby bar stool. I stopped breathing. Underneath, he wasn't wearing a shirt, just bare, deeply tanned skin that still smelled faintly of pool chlorine and expensive cedarwood soap. My eyes, entirely against my will, traced the sharp, defined lines of his collarbones, dipping down to the pronounced, heavy curve of his pectorals, and following the rigid, maddeningly perfect V-line that disappeared into the waistband of his low-slung sweatpants. He was a masterpiece, a goddamn, infuriatingly straight masterpiece. Close your mouth, Asher. You're drooling. Hunter smirked, catching my unabashed staring. I am not, I snapped, quickly averting my eyes, though my heart was suddenly doing a very unlazy sprint against my ribs. Put a shirt on. You're going to catch pneumonia, and I am absolutely not nursing you back to health. Hunter picked up the bucket of Popeyes the Golden, crispy scent practically punching me in the face. He walked over to the sofa, towering over my pathetic blanket-trapped form. He held the chicken just out of my reach. Here's the deal, Hunter said, his voice dropping an octave, low and rumbling. He gestured to his own bare, sculpted torso with his free hand. Draw me. I blinked, my eyes darting from the spicy chicken to the solid wall of abs right in front of my face. What? You need a muscular model. I need you to stop whining and clean up this mess. Hunter tilted the bucket slightly, letting the hot steam waft over me. Draw me. Make it look good, and this entire bucket of spicy chicken is yours. I looked at him. I looked at the golden, crispy skin of the chicken. Then, I looked back at the golden, tight skin of his chest. My inner lazy gremlin was screaming at the effort, but my inner artist and my very empty stomach roared to life. Slowly, I kicked the blankets off. I reached over to the coffee table, grabbing my favorite charcoal pencil and a fresh, crisp sheet of drawing paper. My lazy, sarcastic facade melted away instantly, replaced by the sharp, predatory focus I only reserved for my art. Stand over there by the lamp, I commanded, my voice entirely devoid of its usual whine. And don't move a muscle, Captain. The transaction was swift and ruthless. I snatched the warm, grease-spotted bucket from Hunter's massive hands before he could reconsider his offer. The smell of Cajun spices and deep-fried perfection was intoxicating. I pulled out a drumstick, taking a feral bite. The crispy skin shattered against my teeth, sending a wave of spicy, savory heat across my tongue. I let out a soft, embarrassing groan of pure culinary ecstasy. Don't make that sound while you're eating, it's weird. Hunter grumbled, running a hand through his damp dark hair. I'll make whatever sound I want in the presence of greatness. I mumbled around a mouthful of chicken, pointing a greasy finger toward the center of the living room. Now get over there. Stand directly under the floor lamp. The overhead lighting makes you look like a flat, overboiled sausage. Hunter scowled, but he complied, walking barefoot across the paint-stained rug. Every step he took was heavy grounded, and entirely too graceful for someone his size. He stopped under the cheap IKEA floor lamp, the warm, yellow bulb cast harsh, dramatic shadows down his body, catching the sharp angles of his jaw and pooling in the deep hollows of his collarbones. I chewed rhythmically, my eyes narrowing. My inner lazy gremlin was satisfied with the food, allowing the artist in me to take the steering wheel. I need dynamic tension, I instructed, my voice dropping its usual sarcastic whine, turning clipped and professional. A straight-on standing pose is boring. Plant your feet shoulder-width apart. Shift your weight to your right leg. Now, raise your left arm and put your hand behind your head. Twist your torso to the right. Hunter followed my directions. As he twisted, his body transformed. It was a masterclass in human anatomy. The simple torsion of his spine engaged his entire core. His serratus anterior, those finger-like muscles stretching over his upper ribs, flared out sharply. His obliques tightened into thick, rigid cords, highlighting the impossibly deep V-line that vanished dangerously low into the waistband of his sweatpants. The warm light caught the faint sheen of sweat and pool water still clinging to his golden skin, making his muscles look as if they were carved from polished bronze. I paused, a piece of spicy chicken hovering halfway to my mouth. I had lived with Hunter for nearly 2 years. I had seen him shirtless 1,000 times, walking out of the bathroom, lounging around after a game, changing shirts in a rush. But looking at him and observing him were two very different things. My artistic gaze was clinical, meant to dissect proportions and map shadows. But right now, it felt a little too intrusive, a little too hungry. And it had nothing to do with the Popeyes in my hand. I took a slow breath, trying to steady my suddenly racing pulse. And that was when it hit me, the smell. Our apartment usually smelled like old books, stale coffee, and the sharp, chemical bite of turpentine and oil paints that I constantly left uncapped. But right now, the cramped space was transforming into an olfactory fever dream. The mouth-watering, peppery aroma of the fried chicken radiating from my greasy fingers was violently clashing with Hunter. He was a walking radiator, giving off a ridiculous amount of body heat. That heat was carrying his scent across the few feet separating us, the clean, sterile bite of pool chlorine mixed with the deep, masculine richness of cedarwood soap. It was fresh, aggressive, and undeniably intimate. The combination of spicy food, chemical paint thinner and hot, clean male skin was dizzying. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thick, as if the oxygen had been swapped out for something heavy and flammable. I swallowed the chicken, my throat feeling strangely dry. "Hold that," I commanded, wiping my greasy fingers meticulously on a rag I kept draped over the armrest. I picked up a thick stick of willow charcoal. Hunter didn't say anything, but I noticed a slight shift in his demeanor. Usually, Hunter was a statue of unwavering confidence. A straight-laced, unflappable jock who didn't let anything under his skin. But standing there, half-naked under the harsh spotlight, he looked unsettled. His chest heaved a fraction faster than normal. I watched mesmerized, as the prominent line of his throat bobbed with a hard swallow. "Are you going to draw? Or are you just going to stare at me all night?" Hunter asked. His voice was supposed to sound annoyed, but there was a faint, breathless strain to it. He could feel it. He could feel the weight of my eyes dragging down his sternum, tracing the midline of his stomach, mapping out the very muscles he spent hours perfecting in the gym. For a guy who was supposedly 100% straight, he was reacting awfully intensely to his male roommates simply looking at him. "I'm not staring," I replied, my voice smooth and dangerously low. I brought the charcoal to the crisp, white paper. "I'm dissecting. There's a difference." "Well, dissect faster. I'm getting a cramp," he muttered, though his eyes never left mine. "Art takes time, Captain," I said, a wicked, knowing smirk pulling at the corner of my lips. I deliberately let my gaze drop down to his waistline one more time, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him shift uncomfortably. "Now, take a deep breath, hold it, and let me do my work." Hunter inhaled sharply, his chest expanding massively, his abs locking into an even tighter grid. Scrat. The harsh, distinct sound of charcoal biting into paper echoed in the silent, suffocatingly tense apartment. The contract was sealed, and the real torture was just beginning. For the next 20 minutes, the only sounds in the stiflingly warm apartment were the harsh, abrasive scratch of my willow charcoal against the heavy-tooth paper, and the sickeningly loud crunch of me devouring another piece of spicy chicken. I was a master of multitasking, right hand rapidly sketching the complex, interwoven musculature of Hunter's twisting torso, blocking out light and shadow with ruthless precision. Left hand holding a greasy thigh piece, occasionally bringing it to my mouth without ever breaking eye contact with my subject. Hunter was holding the pose perfectly. I had to give him that. The guy possessed the core stability of a Greek marble statue. But he wasn't made of stone. He was flesh, blood, and a ridiculous, radiating amount of heat. I took a deliberate bite of the chicken. The crunch was deafening in the heavy quiet. I chewed slowly, my eyes locked onto his midsection. I shouldn't be thinking this, a tiny, rational part of my brain whispered. It was highly unprofessional, not to mention a direct violation of the unwritten roommate survival code. But under the warm, unforgiving glare of the cheap floor lamp, his deeply tanned skin looked appetizing. It was a terrible, unholy comparison, but my hungry, exhausted brain couldn't stop it. The golden bronze hue of his chest, slick with a fine layer of post-practice sweat, bore a terrifyingly delicious resemblance to the crispy, perfectly fried skin of the Cajun chicken in my hand. A single drop of water, melted snow from his hair or residual pool water, I couldn't tell, had materialized at the base of his throat. I watched, thoroughly hypnotized, as it slowly tracked down the sharp indent of his sternum, catching the light like a bead of hot oil, before finally disappearing into the dark, tantalizing shadow of his belly button. I swallowed hard. Suddenly, the spicy chicken felt like ash in my mouth. I was still starving, but my stomach wasn't the organ doing the growling anymore. I needed to say something. If I didn't open my mouth right now, the silence was going to strangle me, or worse, he was going to hear my pulse hammering against my own eardrums. So, I grabbed my favorite, most reliable defense mechanism, being an absolute, unrelenting ass. "Relax your deltoids, Captain," I drawled, waving the half-eaten chicken thigh lazily in the direction of his upper body. "You're completely locked up. You look like a terrified freshman trying to flex for the cheerleading squad at a frat party. It's sad, really." Hunter's jaw clenched so hard, I thought I heard his molars grind. The insult hit its mark perfectly. His ego, fragile and hypermasculine as it was, immediately flared up. "I'm not flexing," he gritted out, though the thick veins in his forearms literally bulged to contradict him. "This is just how I stand, Asher. Some of us actually use our muscles instead of letting them atrophy under a mountain of fleece blankets." Sure," I hummed dismissively, completely unbothered. I dragged the charcoal in along, sweeping curve to capture the tense line of his latissimus dorsi. If you say so. Just try not to pop a blood vessel. I don't want to clean up the mess. And seriously, drop the right shoulder a fraction. You're ruining my symmetry. He exhaled a harsh, irritated breath through his nose, adjusting his shoulder as commanded. But the tiny adjustment only made things worse, or better, depending on how you looked at it. As he shifted, the movement caused his lower abdominal muscles to contract violently. The notorious V-line, those two deeply cut grooves that pointed like neon arrows straight past his sweatpants, deepened drastically. My eyes dropped. I couldn't stop them, and honestly, I didn't want to. It wasn't just a casual, artistic glance, it was a slow, deliberate, heavy stare. I traced the line from his collarbone, down the valley of his chest, over the 6 rigid blocks of his abdomen, and parked my gaze right at the dangerous edge of his low-slung waistband. I saw his stomach muscles twitch, a tiny involuntary, beautifully erratic spasm. The air in the room grew exponentially thicker, the temperature skyrocketing. Hunter was suffocating under my gaze, and we both knew it. He was a handsome jock, he was used to being looked at. Girls stared at him all the time. But this was different. I wasn't looking at him with starry-eyed, giggling admiration. I was looking at him like he was a meal, and I was the one holding the cutlery. Are you? Hunter's voice cracked. He cleared his throat aloud, jarring sound, and tried again. Are you getting the proportions right? He was trying to sound casual, but he sounded wrecked. His chest was rising and falling in quick, shallow increments. The straight-laced, unflappable swim captain was having a localized, silent panic attack simply because I was looking at his waistline for 10 seconds too long. Proportions are my specialty, I murmured, my voice dropping to smooth, quiet timbre. I used my thumb to heavily smudge a line of charcoal, softening the dark shadow under his ribs. But I have to admit, you're making it difficult today. There's a lot of distracting detail. Hunter swallowed again. His Adam's apple bobbed sharply in the lamplight. Like what? He asked. There was a terrifying, raw vulnerability in his tone. He shouldn't have asked. A smart, straight guy would have told me to shut up and draw. But he was hooked. He was standing on the edge of a cliff, and he wanted to look down. Like the way your skin flushes when I look at a specific spot for too long. I stated plainly, tilting my head up to lock eyes with him. A dark, furious blush immediately crept up his neck, spreading rapidly across his chest like wildfire. He was caught, exposed. His heterosexuality was a thin paper wall, and my gaze was a lit match. Shut up and draw, Asher, he snapped, his voice rough and incredibly breathless. I smirked a wicked, triumphant little thing, and picked up my chicken again. Whatever you say, Captain. I was thoroughly enjoying my victory. There was a profound, deeply petty satisfaction in watching the untouchable captain of the swim team unravel just because I looked at his waistline. The heavy, stifling silence in the room had shifted from purely awkward to something thick, electric, and dangerously combustible. I picked up my charcoal again, fully intending to capture the exact rigid, panicked tension of his obliques. And then, the moment was violently murdered. An aggressively upbeat pop song shattered the quiet, blaring from the coffee table. It was Hunter's phone. The bright screen illuminated the messy surface, flashing a name accompanied by a barrage of heart emojis, Chloe Cheer. My charcoal snapped in half, leaving a dark, jagged smear across the pristine white paper. Chloe, of course, the co-captain of the cheer squad, blonde, bubbly, and possessing the persistence of a door-to-door vacuum salesman. She had been throwing herself at Hunter since the first week of the fall semester. She was the textbook definition of a green tea bitch, sweet and innocent on the surface, but fiercely calculating underneath. Hunter flinched at the sudden noise. His eyes darted to the phone, then back to me. I should probably take that, he muttered, his voice still a little raspy from our previous exchange. Don't you dare break that pose, I warned, my tone instantly dropping 10 degrees. I finally got the lighting right on your serratus anterior. If you move, the chicken deal is off. Hunter hesitated, clearly torn between his ingrained politeness and the threat of me withholding his bribe. Can I at least put it on speaker? I waved the broken half of my charcoal dismissively. Knock yourself out. Just don't move your torso. Hunter stretched out a long, muscular arm, careful to keep his lower body planted exactly as I had instructed, tapped the glowing green button, and brought his hand back behind his head. Hey Chloe, he said, trying to sound normal. Hunter, her voice echoed through the small apartment speaker. It was pure, unfiltered syrup. Just hearing it made my teeth ache. I haven't seen you all day. Did you skip the athletic mixer? Yeah, I had practice. Then I had to get home, Hunter replied. He was looking at the wall, purposely avoiding my gaze. That's no fun, Chloe pouted audibly. Listen, a bunch of us are going to that new club downtown tomorrow night. You should totally come, or, you could just come over to my place beforehand. I can make us some drinks. The implication hung heavily in there, loud and crystal clear. A sudden, sharp spike of irrational anger flared in my chest. Here I was, meticulously mapping out the beautiful, golden architecture of his body, and this girl was trying to summon him like a lapdog for cheap vodka and a hookup. I suddenly felt very territorial over the 6'2" wall of muscle standing in my living room. He was my model tonight, my roommate. I decided to be an absolute menace. I reached into the bucket and pulled out a spicy chicken wing. I brought it to my mouth and bit down, crunch. I made sure it was loud, then I let out a soft, low hum of approval deep in my throat. It was the kind of sound you make when something is undeniably, sinfully delicious. Hunter's eyes instantly snapped away from the wall and zeroed in on me. What was that noise? Chloe asked through the phone, her sweet tone faltering slightly. Are you not alone? I'm sorry. Hunter stammered. The smooth, confident jock was completely malfunctioning. His gaze was glued to my face. I knew exactly what I looked like. My hair was a messy, unbrushed nest. My fingers were stained with dark charcoal dust and shiny grease. And my lips, the Cajun hot sauce was bright fiery red, coating my mouth. Maintaining direct, unblinking eye contact with Hunter, I deliberately poked the tip of my tongue out. Moving agonizingly slow, I licked the spicy, glistening sauce off my bottom lip, dragging my tongue along the curve of my mouth before sucking the grease off my thumb with a soft, wet pop. Hunter stopped breathing. I actually saw his chest freeze mid-inhale. The dark blush that had previously settled on his neck flared back to life with a vengeance, creeping all the way up to the tips of his ears. His pupils dilated so fast the blue of his irises almost vanished. He looked entirely mesmerized, trapped in the gravity of my petty, calculated provocation. Hunter, are you still there? Chloe's voice buzzed, sounding small and annoying, like a mosquito trapped in a jar. Yeah, I'm here. Hunter choked out. His voice was hoarse, thick with a sudden, heavy distraction. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing sharply. I can't, Chloe, I have plans this weekend. Oh, the disappointment was palpable. With who? I smiled, a wicked, unapologetic smirk that showcased my shiny, by-stained lips. I picked up my broken charcoal and pointed it at him, mouthing the words, tell her. With my roommate, Hunter blurted out, his eyes never leaving my mouth. I have plans with Asher. I almost laughed at how pathetic he sounded. He was supposed to be the dominant, untouchable athlete, but right now, he was completely at the mercy of my mouth and a bucket of fast food. However, staring at me so intently while trying to talk on the phone came with a steep physical price. Because his brain was entirely short-circuiting over the sight of my tongue, he forgot to maintain the brutal tension of the pose. His hip shifted slightly to the left, and his twisted torso sagged, throwing his perfect balance entirely off kilter. You're slipping, Captain, I whispered, the sound barely carrying across the room, but I knew he heard it. He tried to hastily correct his posture, jerking his waist back into the harsh, twisted angle, but muscles, especially exhausted ones, don't take kindly to sudden, uncoordinated shocks. The consequence was instantaneous. A loud, strangled gasp tore through the stifling apartment. Hunter's entire right side seized. From my vantage point on the sofa, I could actually see the muscle lock up, the thick, golden band of his oblique spasming violently under his skin like a coiled spring snapping out of place. He folded like a cheap lawn chair, his perfect balance entirely shattered. He hit the paint-stained rug with a heavy, ungraceful thud, curling inward as he clutched desperately at his right side. The phone clattered onto the floorboards, bouncing once before settling near the coffee table. Chloe's syrupy voice immediately shifted from annoying to alarmed. Hunter, oh my God. What was that crash? Are you okay? Hello? I stared at him for exactly 2 seconds. My inner lazy gremlin protested loudly. Do not get up. Do not get involved. Let the jock suffer the consequences of his own hubris. But my charcoal sketch was ruined. My model was currently writhing on the floor, and as annoying as he was, I actually needed him functional if I was going to pass Higgins' class. You are without a doubt the most high-maintenance model I have ever had the displeasure of working with, I complained loudly, dropping my prized, half-eaten piece of chicken back into the bucket. Asher Hunter gasped out. His eyes were squeezed shut, his face flushed not with the previous embarrassment, but with genuine, blinding agony, cramp. Is locked up, fuck. Yeah, no shit, Captain. That's what happens when you try to abruptly adjust your center of gravity while actively hallucinating about my fast food. I stood up, grabbing the damp rag I kept draped over my easel. I wiped my greasy hands frantically, scrubbing the hot sauce and oil off my fingers. It removed the grease, but the sharp, peppery scent of the Cajun rub clung stubbornly to my skin. Whatever. It would have to do. I crossed the living room in 3 long strides, dropping to my knees on the rug right beside him, up close. The sheer amount of heat radiating off his body was ridiculous. He felt like a human furnace operating at maximum capacity. "Move your hand," I ordered, slapping his thick, trembling wrist away from his waistline. "It hurts like a bitch," he hissed through clenched teeth, his massive chest heaving erratically. "I know how anatomy works, meathead. I've been dissecting yours for the last 40 minutes. Let me see it." I didn't wait for permission. I shoved his hand aside and pressed both of my palms flat against his lower stomach. The contrast was violently shocking. My hands were freezing. The apartment was drafty. The storm was raging outside, and I had terrible circulation on the best of days. Hunter, on the other hand, was burning hot, his skin slick with a thin, feverish sheen of sweat. The exact second my cold palms made contact with the spasming muscle just above his hip bone, Hunter's entire body violently arched. He let out a sharp ragged hiss, his head falling back against the rug, exposing the thick column of his throat. "Christ," he breathed, the words shuddering out of him. I wasn't entirely sure if the exclamation was born from the sudden spike of pain, or the overwhelming shock of the temperature drop. Honestly, looking at the way his skin immediately broke out in goosebumps around my fingers, I suspected it was the latter. "Stop moving," I scolded, though my own heart had decided to randomly skip a beat. I needed better leverage. Without a second thought, I shifted my weight, bringing my right knee up and effectively straddling his thick, muscular thigh. The position was highly compromising. If anyone walked in right now, or if Chloe, who was still screeching his name through the phone speaker, suddenly developed X-ray vision, we would be very hard-pressed to explain why the lazy art student was aggressively riding the swim captain's leg while fondling his V-line on the living room floor. But I was an artist. And right now, this was purely medicinal, probably. I found the epicenter of the cramp, a rock-hard, stubborn knot of seized muscle fiber sitting dangerously low on his pelvis, right where the dark gray elastic of his sweatpants dipped. Without hesitating, I dug both of my thumbs deeply into the knot. Hunter let out a guttural, strangled groan. His large hands flew up, but not to push me away. Instead, his fingers blindly found my hips, gripping the fabric of my oversized sweater to steady himself. His hold was desperate, his fingers digging almost painfully into my sides. "Breathe, Hunter. If you hold your breath, you deprive the muscle of oxygen. Basic biology. Did you skip that class to do more bicep curls?" I mocked, trying to keep my voice steady. It was getting increasingly difficult to maintain my sarcastic facade. The physical reality of the situation was quickly overriding my petty victory. Under my thumbs, I could feel the incredible density of his muscles, the raw, cold power hidden beneath the smooth, golden skin. I began to knead the knot, applying brutal, unrelenting pressure. I dragged my thumbs in slow, heavy arcs down the slope of his lower abdomen, forcing the locked fibers to release. The friction generated a new, dangerous kind of heat between my freezing fingers and his burning skin. The symphony of scents I had noticed earlier was completely suffocating me now. I was hovering right over him, inhaling the intoxicating, intimate blend of pool chlorine cedarwood male sweat, and the sharp bite of the spices lingering heavily on my own hands. "Hunter. Should I call someone?" "Hunter. Answer me," Chloe's panicked voice squeaked from the floorboard. Hunter didn't answer her. He couldn't. His eyes were open now. They were blown wide and completely dark, staring up at me with an expression that had absolutely nothing to do with a muscle cramp. He wasn't looking at my spice-stained lips anymore. He was looking right into my eyes, drowning in the sudden, terrifying proximity. The muscle beneath my hands finally began to shudder, the hard knot slowly dissolving under my relentless massage. But as the physical pain faded, it was rapidly replaced by something else. Something much more visceral, much more dangerous. My thumbs were resting perilously low now, accidentally brushing against the thick cotton band of his sweatpants with every downward stroke. His breathing hadn't slowed down, if anything. It had grown shallower, harsher. And the grip he had on my hips had shifted. It was no longer a desperate hold to endure pain. It was a heavy, possessive anchor. He was pulling me down, just a fraction of an inch, pressing my thighs firmer against his own. He didn't want me to move. He didn't want me to stop. "Asher," he whispered. The sound barely escaped his throat, lost beneath the blaring noise of the storm outside and the tiny voice on the phone. It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't a sarcastic comeback. It was a plea. Asher. The whisper hung in the heavy air between us, a fragile, desperate sound that felt entirely out of place coming from the famously stoic captain of the swim team. His hands were still gripping my hips, not pushing me away, but holding me exactly where I was, straddling his thigh, thumbs resting precariously on his waistline. For a fraction of a second, my sarcastic, lazy armor completely evaporated. I was just a guy, breathing in the intoxicating scent of chlorine and cedarwood, staring down into a pair of impossibly dark, dilated blue eyes. And then, the universe decided to remind me that we were not, in fact, alone in this apartment. Hunter, Cloistro. Frantic voice shrieked from the phone lying abandoned on the floorboards just inches from my knee. That's it. I'm calling campus security. I swear to God, if you're having a heart attack. The spell was violently broken. My inner artist, who had been momentarily stunned by the sheer aesthetic perfection of the situation, immediately stepped back, letting my petty, vindictive inner gremlin take the wheel. A heart attack, please. The only thing Hunter was suffering from was a severe case of repressed sexual panic and a minor lack of potassium. And here was Chloe, trying to play the heroic, concerned almost girlfriend, interrupting my highly effective, completely medicinal massage. I looked at the glowing screen of the phone, then looked back down at Hunter. He was entirely vulnerable, his usually impenetrable walls smashed to pieces, completely at my mercy. I decided, in that exact moment, to be thoroughly, unapologetically evil. You should really answer your girl, Captain, I whispered, my voice dripping with honeyed malice. It's rude to keep her waiting. Hunter blinked, a flash of confusion crossing his flushed features. Asher, don't. I didn't let him finish. I shifted my weight, leaning closer until my messy hair brushed against his forehead. I found the exact, sensitive trigger point where his rectus abdominis met the inguinal ligament, the deepest, tightest part of the muscle knot that was already hovering on the edge of painful sensitivity. And then, with a wicked, triumphant smirk, I dug both of my freezing thumbs into the pressure point as hard as I possibly could. The reaction was explosive. Hunter's hip snapped upward off the rug, a violent, involuntary jerk that ground his thigh directly into the cradle of my hips. He threw his head back, his eyes squeezing shut, and let out a sound that I would probably take to my grave. Oh fuck. It was a deep, guttural groan that started in the broad expanse of his chest and tore through his throat. It was supposed to be a reaction to the sharp spike of pain, but combined with the relentless, kneading friction of my hands and the sheer tension of the last hour, it didn't sound like pain at all. It sounded dark. It sounded wrecked. It sounded undeniably, obscenely pleasurable. Asher, Hunter gasped blindly, his chest heaving as his fingers dug frantically into my sides, pulling me closer instead of pushing me off. Ah, God. Right there, just. Don't press so hard. The silence that followed from the phone speaker was the loudest sound I had ever heard. For 3 agonizingly long seconds, the only audio in the room was the rattling of the blizzard against the windows and Hunter's harsh, ragged panting as he tried to catch his breath beneath me. Then, a scandalized, horrified gasp echoed from the phone. Oh my God, Chloe breathed, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and profound disgust. Are you kidding me, Hunter? Beep. The call abruptly ended. The screen went black. I sat back slightly, an overwhelming sense of petty victory washing over me. I had done it. I had successfully eradicated the cheerleader threat using nothing but human anatomy and my bare hands. I looked down at Hunter, fully expecting to deliver a devastatingly witty one-liner about his lost weekend plans. But the joke died in my throat. The sound of the dial tone seemed to have snapped something fundamental inside Hunter's brain. The realization of what had just happened, of the sound he had just made into the phone for his pseudo-girlfriend to hear, collided violently with the adrenaline and the suffocating lust that had been building in the room. His eyes snapped open. The vulnerability was gone, instantly replaced by something wild, predatory, and completely unhinged. You think this is a game? Hunter growled, his voice a dangerous, vibrating rasp. Before my brain could even process the threat, the world spun on its axis. Hunter moved with the terrifying, explosive speed of a trained athlete. 1 second, I was sitting victoriously on his thigh. The next, the rug was swept out from under me. He gripped my hips, twisted his core, and flipped our positions with effortless, brutal strength. My back hit the paint-stained rug with a dull thud, knocking the breath out of my lungs. Suddenly, The sky was completely blocked out by a massive, golden wall of muscle. Hunter was straddling me, his heavy knees bracketing my hips. Pinning me to the floor, his large, calloused hands shot out, capturing both of my wrists and slamming them down against the rug beside my head in a vice-like grip. Hunter, I gasped, my eyes widening in genuine shock. You think you're so smart? He breathed heavily, leaning down until his face was inches from mine. His chest was rising and falling rapidly, brushing against the thick fabric of my oversized sweater with every erratic breath. The heat radiating off him was absolute. I was entirely trapped under 200 pounds of furious, panicked, hypermasculine muscle. He had pinned me. He had taken complete physical control of the situation. Yet, looking up into his dark, storm-filled eyes, watching the way his gaze dropped hungrily to my spice-stained lips and stayed there, I realized something terrifying. I might have been the one pinned to the floor, but Hunter was the one who had completely lost the war. The silence in the room was absolute, deafening in its intensity. The only sounds left in the universe were the howling blizzard rattling the window panes and the harsh, erratic tearing of Hunter's breath against my face. He had me completely pinned. My wrists were locked in his massive, calloused hands, pressed firmly into the rug on either side of my head. His knees bracketed my hips, trapping my lower half under his crushing, radiating heat. By all physical metrics, I was the one who had been defeated. I was the one immobilized. But looking up into his eyes, I knew I had won. The dark, bottomless blue of his irises was swirling with a chaotic storm of absolute terror and unrestrained lust. He wasn't looking at me like I was his annoying, lazy roommate anymore. He was looking at me like he wanted to devour me whole. His gaze dropped again, zeroing in on my mouth. The red, spicy stain of the Cajun sauce still lingered on my bottom lip. I didn't say a word. I didn't taunt him. I didn't need to. I just lay there, my own heart hammering a violent rhythm against my ribcage, and let him drown in the proximity. Asher, he breathed. It wasn't a warning this time. It was a surrender. Slowly, agonizingly, the imposing wall of golden muscle lowered. The clean, sharp scent of cedarwood and chlorine enveloped me completely, suffocating my senses. I could feel the microscopic tremors in his arms as they strained against his own self-control. His face drifted closer, casting a shadow over me. His chest brushed against the thick wool of my sweater, the contact sending a visceral jolt of electricity straight down my spine. He hovered a mere millimeter from my mouth. I could feel the ghost of his lips, the frantic heat of his breath mingling with mine. The friction of the air between us was so thick it felt tangible. I stopped breathing entirely, waiting for the impact. I parted my lips slightly, granting him the silent, final permission he was begging for. Do what I thought, the anticipation a tight coil in my stomach. Cross the line, Captain. But the line proved to be an insurmountable cliff. Right at the exact millisecond our lips would have brushed, the reality of the situation violently slammed into Hunter's brain like a runaway freight train. The phantom echo of Chloe's horrified gasp, the feeling of his male roommate's wrists under his hands, the overwhelming, terrifying realization that he, the notoriously straight, untouchable star athlete of the university, was millimeters away from desperately making out with another guy on the living room floor. The gay panic hit him with the force of a physical blow. Hunter recoiled. It wasn't a smooth retreat, it was an explosive, panicked flinch. He released my wrists as if my skin had suddenly turned to molten lava. Fuck, he shouted, his voice cracking wildly. He scrambled off me, his balance so completely wrecked that he actually stumbled backward, his heel catching on the edge of the coffee table. He caught himself against the wall, chest heaving like he had just sprinted a marathon underwater. His eyes were wide, terrified, and darting around the room as if searching for an escape route from his own mind. Fuck, what am I? What the hell am I doing? He gasped, burying his hands into his damp hair, pulling at the roots. I remained on the rug for a moment, letting the oxygen slowly return to my lungs. My wrists tingled where his tight grip had been. I didn't move to comfort him. I knew better than to approach a cornered animal, especially one experiencing an existential crisis of this magnitude. Hunter didn't look at me again. He couldn't. He lunged forward, snatching his discarded hoodie off the bar stool with a blind, frantic swipe. He didn't even bother putting it on. He just held it against his chest like a pathetic shield, turned on his heel, and bolted down the short hallway. The heavy wooden door of the bathroom slammed shut with a concussive bang that shook the picture frames on the walls. A split second later, the sharp, definitive click of the deadbolt locking echoed through the apartment. 10 seconds after that, the pipes groaned, and the unmistakable roar of the shower turning on full blast filled the silence. Cold water. Undoubtedly. The universal, tragic soundtrack of repressed heterosexual panic. Slowly, I pushed myself up from the floor. My muscles felt weirdly liquid, buzzing with residual adrenaline and the ghost of his heavy heat. I stretched my shoulders, rolling my neck until it popped. I looked down at the messy rug, then over at the locked bathroom door. I let out a soft, breathy chuckle that slowly bloomed into a wide, unapologetic smirk. I walked over to my easel. The charcoal sketch was incomplete. The legs were missing, and the arms were just rough outlines. But the torso, the twisting dynamic, furiously tense lines of his core, the deep shadows of his obliques, the rigid, panic perfection of his abs. It was flawless. The image was permanently burned into my retinas anyway. I didn't need him to stand there anymore. I had all the material I needed to ace Professor Higgins' portfolio. I picked up my broken piece of charcoal, signed my name with a dramatic flourish at the bottom corner of the heavy paper, and tossed the charcoal onto the table. Then, my stomach let out another soft growl, reminding me of my original priorities. I casually strolled back to the sofa, picking up the slightly battered Popeye's bucket. The chicken was a bit cold now, but I didn't care. I pulled out a large, crispy thigh piece, sank onto the plush cushions, and took a massive, deeply satisfying bite. I chewed slowly, my eyes drifting back toward the bathroom door, where the water was still running relentlessly. Hunter could hide in the freezing shower all night if he wanted to. He could build his walls back up tomorrow, act cold, and pretend that none of this had happened. He could try to convince himself that he was straight until he was blue in the face. But I knew the truth. I had felt his heartbeat. I had heard that ruined, desperate groan. I knew exactly what happened when I looked at him for too long. I licked a stray drop of hot sauce off my thumb, a lazy, victorious sigh escaping my lips. The spicy fried chicken was absolutely delicious. But honestly, as I stared at the locked door, listening to the muffled sounds of the panicked swim captain inside, I realized I had just found a brand new favorite dish on the menu. And the best part was, he lived right down the hall.